had so graciously introduced me earlier. I'm Gordon Long, G. Gordon Long, the author of the book The Winds of Midnight, the tragic story of the Pattenburg Massacre. And it is indeed a great pleasure for me to be here tonight offering this lecture in this particular building, the church that was here and played a part in the story that I will talk about tonight and that's also mentioned in the book. I'm going to also have to assist in my discussion some slides, some pictures, many of them from around here, pictures of the locale, but others are added simply to substitute and move the stories along. So if you see some that you say that's not from this area, don't be worried about it. But tonight I'd like to tell you a story of a mob riot, of gruesome murders, and a town living in fear of reprisal in its aftermath. It's a dark story, one that some would rather see left forgotten, much like the victims have been forgotten. Perhaps of some comfort is the fact that this isn't a modern-day story. Even so, this isn't a story set in some far-off locale. This is a story from the past, our own past, here in Hunterdon County. A story which, despite the passing of time, still raises questions of conduct and of conscience, both by those that perpetrated the crimes and those that in its aftermath sat in its judgment. For this is a story largely to do with racial motivation, all of the sort we have come to expect is only taking place far from here, perhaps deep in the backwoods of some southern town, long ago committed by a band of misguided hooded men. But this is not the case of this story that I will share with you. Prologue. To begin then, let me take you back in time to the year 1872. It is late summer. September that year has been a dry month with much heat, but it is nearly over. 7 years earlier, America has emerged from a costly and destructive civil war, a war fought over many issues, arguably the most prominent, the issue of slavery. It has also been a war fought by many of who themselves are new arrivals to America. Perhaps one of the largest of these groups are the immigrant Irish, escaping the economic plight of a country hard hit by famine and continued English rule. The new Americans enlist in the armies of the North and the South by the thousands, and they die by the thousands. Some join not so much out of any Christian outrage of seeing other men enslaved, but simply as a means of obtaining subsistence for themselves and their families through the meager pay of a Union soldier. Now, with the war over, they have found jobs others often refused. Jobs such as policemen and firemen in the cities, occupations not necessarily of significant appeal to most of the populace, but they offer opportunity, a salary, and perhaps even a chance for advancement someday. In the more rural areas, many take up the trade of their forefathers, working the mines of Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And it's a hard life, but it's all many have ever known and ever will. I know my grandfather was one of them, and I have read the stories of that life. They worked hard, raised families of no small size, and many drank to what would become stereotyped proportions, perhaps trying to fill the void that comes with the hopelessness of knowing few will ever rise above their current station in life. Even in this new land of freedom, they are an unwelcomed lot, these Irish. Thought of by the white gentry of the more established Mayflower families as unclean and unfit to share in the wealth of this still new country. Irish need not apply signs are quite common in storefronts and other businesses looking to hire. And more often than not, it is the women who find employment, even if no more than maids or factory workers in the textile mills. In much the same way, the newly freed slaves who also now find themselves suddenly in charge of their own lives, yet in a world that also seems reluctant to make room for them. Like many before them, they had followed the Underground Railroad northward to freedom. These newly freed Americans also begin to leave their birthplaces and migrate north and west in search of opportunity. And strangely enough, it is this very similarity, this desire for something better, that will set the Irish and the blacks on a course of conflict which will last for decades to come, and will only begin to subside when the Irish themselves take a few more steps up the rungs of the social ladder. There are also other changes now happening in this post-Civil War era. Before the start of the Civil War, it was said that cotton was king. But by the end of the war, another commodity has begun to take a hold on our economy. By the late 19th century, the coal industry is becoming as big as the petroleum industry will become in the 20th century. This new economy is also producing a new crop of millionaires, made such as Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt, and from Pennsylvania, Asa Packer. To meet the increased demand for this new source of fuel that keeps the machinery of steam-powered manufacturing and transportation going, the coal barons, such as Asa Packer of Pennsylvania, continually seek more efficient ways to mine and haul their coal to market ports such as Perth Amboy and Hoboken, New Jersey, where it can then be loaded on ships for sale up and down the Atlantic seacoast. It is this desire for efficiency and higher profits that will lead Asa Packer to build his Lehigh Valley Railroad from the coal regions of northeastern Pennsylvania through Easton towards the Jersey waterfronts, a path that will ultimately take him straight through the heart of the Musconetcong Mountain and the sleepy village of Pattenburg in 1872. 1872 Pattenburg is like so many other little villages tucked away in the shadow of the surrounding mountains of Hunterdon County. With a population of roughly 200, it has its origins in the early 1700s as a farming community, growing apples and peaches for markets in nearby cities such as New York and Philadelphia. By the mid-19th century, the village has also become home to other businesses, including fruit basket manufacturing, and a rye whiskey distillery run by two brothers who've developed a distilling process for which they receive a U.S. patent, an event that gives the town its new name. It is into this rather idyllic setting that Asa Packer arrives in the summer of 1872 with plans to build a railroad through the area, straight from the coal regions of Pennsylvania to the ports of New Jersey. There is only one small obstacle he has to deal with. A 600-foot mountain called the Musconetcong, named by the Indians that once lived in its shadows. To the white inhabitants of the area, however, the mountain is known as Jugtown Mountain. Some say for the many potteries and jug kilns that operate in the area, or perhaps, as local lore suggests, for the equal number of groggeries and stills hidden in the deep woods outside the village. To tackle the job of tunneling a railroad through the mountain, Asa Packer hires the contracting firm of Charles McFadden, a railroad and tunnel builder who has just finished a project in Virginia. Along with him, McFadden brings 150 blacks to work for him. Having found employment with McFadden in Virginia to be both fair and profitable, they are eager to continue their employment with him in New Jersey. But Charles McFadden needs more than 150 men to tackle the massive job of digging a nearly mile-long tunnel through the solid rock of Jugtown Mountain. What he also needs are men who are accustomed to the dark and dangerous work of blasting and cutting holes through earth and stone. Men who accept the hard fact that with every 100 feet or so of tunnel, the mountain will likely demand something in return. That men will die before it is done. As in the past, McFadden finds this willingness in the Irish miners he employs, and in turn is willing to run the risk of bringing together these two groups, blacks and Irish. a mix who in the past have demonstrated an open hostility to each other, one that often results in violence if these two groups are not carefully managed. But despite this, the summer of 1872 moves along without much incident. Work progresses on the tunnel from two directions, from the eastern side of the mountain, the other side from the western side. The eastern side of the work was just a half a mile from Pattenburg. At the time, the tunnel construction is heralded as one of the greatest engineering feats of the century. At 4,785 feet, nearly a mile long, it is the longest tunnel project ever undertaken, and it must meet exactly in the middle. Before being completed, it will consume several tons of a newly developed explosive called dynamite, used to blast away at the mountain a few feet at a time. It will also claim the lives of 3 workers from cave-ins and other accidents. But by September of that year, other than a few reported shoving matches, mainly on Saturday nights following payday, when both groups have money to spend on whiskey and Applejack, there is little to warn McFadden and his foreman of the coming disturbance that will begin on the evening of September 21st. Saturday night, September 21st. Like most other Saturday nights, the men are allowed to end their labors early and return to their log shanties to clean up and relax. The next day being Sunday the Sabbath, there will be no work performed on the tunnel. On Saturday nights, the men entertain themselves by playing cards, singing songs, or just milling around, swapping tales of past adventures. A few wander off towards Pattenburg, seeking something more substantial to drink than spring water, or purchase goods from the locals, such as pies, butchered meats, or dry goods from the general store along Main Street. Charles McFadden has been sure to keep the groups as separated as reasonably possible when they are working in close proximity to each other. He orders the construction of the workers' shanties to be done on separate sides of the tunnel cut. In this way, each group's camps are high ground with the rail bed and a distance of 100 feet separating them. Each shanty provides bunks for 4 men and a small wood stove for heat and cooking. There is a second camp for the black workers on the Carter farm, about a mile east of the tunnel works. Here, the work gangs are busy leveling out the ground for the rail line approaching from Pattenburg. Although the facts remain unclear as to just when the troubles start that night, it appears that the first disturbance begins a little after 10 p.m. that evening, when a small group of blacks returning from a night of serenading and drinking encounter a group of Irish workers along the embankment of a mill pond just outside of town behind the Pattenburg Hotel. Whether for sport or more likely an earnest dislike, the Irish endeavor to push the blacks back towards the mill pond and a struggle ensues. Although outnumbered, the blacks give as good as they get, and ultimately they run the Irish off back towards their own shanties. But before long, the Irish workers regroup, and adding a few more to their number, return to renew the fight with the blacks. Still, even with these added numbers, the black workers again are successful at standing off the assault. This despite the Irish now having brought guns in addition to their pickaxe handles. And during the fight, however, a weapon is discharged, and one of the black workers, Joe Warren, is wounded in the hand. And the Irish finally break off their attack and head back to their shanties to lick their wounds and bruised egos. Much more drinking and swearing of vengeance no doubt follows. The blacks also return to their shanties. Not wanting any more trouble and hoping the Irish have themselves had enough, they turn in for the night. A little after 2 a.m. Sunday morning, the blacks are awakened by a call within the camp to rise and flee. A group of Irish workers has been spotted forming across the railroad cut, and now beginning to fire shots into the camp of the blacks, advance. During the hours following the first two encounters with these blacks, the Irish have sent runners over the mountain to their western camp to gather more recruits for their ragtag army. Those that refuse to take part are themselves beaten into submission by the militant Irish, who vow to take their revenge against the blacks that have beaten them back by the mill pond earlier in the evening. The Irish increase the amount of firing they are doing into the camp of the black workers. Trying to take cover, these blacks begin to flee, leaving behind most of their possessions, including their wages, which many have stuffed into their satchels and bedrolls still inside their shanties. Seeing the blacks running, the Irish begin to cross the embankment and swarm through the camp, looting and setting fire to the crude log cabins. A few of the blacks try to hold their ground, fighting back with clubs and other work implements, but they are greatly outnumbered and eventually take flight. For a moment, the Irish mob does not follow. Content to continue with their looting and burning of the black shanties, many fighting over the money the blacks have left behind. It is at this point, amidst the noise and confusion, the discharging of weapons and the scattering of belongings in search of money, that the body of Thomas Cole, an Irish worker, is discovered near the doorway of one of the burning sheds. He has been shot once in the back of the head and is laying there dead. John Kelly, one of McFadden's foremen, sleeping in his boarding house bed in Pattenburg, is suddenly awakened by the commotion and the sounds of people running down the street. Moving towards his upward bedroom window, he sees the flames growing higher in the direction of the tunnel and the shanties. He pulls his pants and work boots on and hurries to the scene, encountering fleeing blacks who are passing his way. They hurriedly describe the scene back at the tunnel, and he tells them to take refuge with the other blacks at the Carter farm a mile away. Back at the tunnel works, the mob seems more occupied with their destruction of the camp than the body of Thomas Cole. But upon the arrival of John Kelly, the foreman, the leaders of the mob start to swear retaliation against the blacks, who they now begin to blame for Thomas Cole's death. Kelly tries to quiet them down, but the mob grows more angry. Whiskey bottles are passed around as the group discusses what must be done, and the leaders call out for the mob to run the niggers clean out of the country. They head down the tracks in pursuit of the fleeing blacks. A half a mile along the way, they leave the tracks, turning down a road under the rails that leads to the Pattenburg's main street. As they begin to pass through the town, they stop at boarding houses and private homes, demanding that other Irish workers with rooms in the town join their force. One of these Irishmen is a laborer by the name of David College. Again, those that refuse are assaulted and dragged from their beds into the street. Reluctantly, they follow, fearful of further reprisals if they don't. At one point, a few in the mob begin to confront residents and shopkeepers, demanding weapons that they are sure are kept in the dwellings. They are told no such weapons exist. Undaunted, the mob continues through the town and takes to the fields at the eastern end of Pattenburg. It is here, near James Stockton's house, that they overtake Dennis Powell, a black worker who has been unable to keep up with his friends. Seeing them approaching, Powell tries to run into a field of hay and would likely have succeeded in escaping had it not been for a rail fence that was in his path. Stopping to climb over it, it cost him valuable seconds. Several shots ring out, striking him in the back and side. Wounded badly, he slumps to the ground in a heap, and the Irish mob sets upon him with clubs and axe handles. Satisfied that his lifeless body holds no further need to continue their assault, the mob moves on towards the Carter farm. In truth, however, Dennis Powell is still alive, though barely. He crawls a few feet away, trying to conceal himself in the tall grass. Within a half a mile near George Ree's farm, they again come upon another black man, hiding in the underbrush near a stream. Knowing he has been spotted, Oscar Bruce jumps up from his cover and runs out into the road, trying to make it into the deeper woods just a few hundred feet away. But like Dennis Powell, he is overtaken, and then at so close a range as to leave gunpowder burns in his clothing. The mob fires volleys of shots into him, killing him instantly, but still they set upon him with their clubs. With the Irish mob but a short distance behind, the first group of blacks from the Tundle shanties now begin to arrive at the Carter farm. Mercy Carter, a widow and the daughter of Aaron Von Sickle, who lives with her and her son Charles Dilly, awakes to the sound of loud banging on her front door. She goes to the window, seeing several of the black workers running frantically around her yard. They tell her they are being pursued by the Irish, and they plead with her to allow them to hide within the house. But fearing for her own safety and the safety of her father and son, she refuses them entrance. Instead, she tells them to take shelter in the outbuildings, in the barn or the chicken coop. Most of the blacks simply continue to run into the fields. A few attempt to hide in the outbuildings. Two of them, Ben Dishman and Coleman Lewis, see an opportunity to conceal themselves under the front porch of the house through a small opening where the family dog usually sleeps. Coleman Lewis, being younger and slighter built, is able to climb further into the hole in the house's foundation, thus secreting himself. Ben Dishman, a withered and aging man of 55 years, cannot fit through the opening and is forced to remain more exposed under the main section of the porch. Within a few minutes, they can hear the sounds of the Irish mob coming down the lane and into the yard in front of the house. Mercy Carter has now stepped through the second floor window and is standing on the porch roof to face the leaders of the mob. They demand entry into the house, certain she is hiding the blacks, and again she refuses to open the door. They tell her to open or they'll burn the house down. Defiantly, she tells them, "Burn the house down then, if you will, but I will tell you I will not let you in." One of the gang members jumps up on the porch and smashes in a panel of the front door. Aaron Van Sickle, already in his late 70s, is standing behind the door, waiting with a shotgun for the first man that dares enter. He tells them he will use it. It is at this point that someone in the mob spots Ben Dishman hiding under the porch. Their attention turns from the house to him. One of the Irish men shoots Ben in the back. Others grab him by the feet and pull him out into the open. Standing around him with the light of their torches, they begin to beat and kick until he is dead. The mob then confronts the foreman of the Carter farm and forces him to open the doors to the barn and other outbuildings. Reluctantly, he complies. They search each building, but finding none of the other blacks, they regroup again in front of the Carter farmhouse. John Holmes, one of the blacks who has climbed up into the rafters of the chicken coop and through some miracle has gone undetected, will remain clinging there until sunrise, when he can continue his escape east. But now the mob begins to run out of steam. The sun is beginning to come up and they head back towards the tunnel and their shanties. However, along the way, they again come across Dennis Powell, still trying to crawl away into the tall grass to hide. A few drag him out into the open and finish him, leaving his disfigured body to be discovered in the road by the farmer George Ree in the morning. With the black shanties smoldering and the scene around the tunnel looking like a great army has waged a war, the Irish begin to settle down. It is Sunday morning around 6 a.m., and they finally had enough. Aftermath. It is a full day, Monday the 23rd, before the authorities of the county seat in Flemington are made aware of the riot and the murders. Sheriff Rittenhouse, a portly and soon-to-be-revealed slow-moving man, receives a telegram from Annandale, a small town about 6 miles east of Pattenburg, where another rail line has already established the only telegraph office in the immediate vicinity of Pattenburg. He is advised there has been a riot, but 4 men, 1 white, 3 blacks have been killed, and that the town is under siege by gangs of roaming Irish workers, who now openly warn the residents of Pattenburg to remain silent about the events having taken place in their village, or there'll be more trouble. Despite the severity of such news and having received it very early that Monday morning, Sheriff Rittenhouse does not arrive in Pattenburg until late Monday evening. Even accounting for the 12-mile ride by horse that lay between Flemington and Pattenburg, the 10 or more hours to arrive at the scene has always been indeed curious. When later asked about this by a New York Sun reporter, Sheriff Rittenhouse explains that the delay was simply that he had other business to attend to before he could leave for Pattenburg. Perhaps riots and massacres of this type were quite common in Hunterdon County in the 1870s, and the good sheriff wasn't concerned about getting to this one in any particular hurry. By the time the sheriff arrives, the body of all 4 men have been buried. Thomas Cole in a church cemetery at Hampton Junction, about 10 miles away, and the 3 blacks, Dennis Powell, Ben Dishman, and Oscar Bruce, in more or less unmarked graves along the rail bed near the Carter farm. Though more than financially able, the railroad feels no specific responsibility for ensuring the bodies are returned to their families in Virginia. After all the railroad reasons, these men worked for Charles McFadden's contracting company. Father O'Neill, the parish priest for the church in Hampton Junction, officiates over the burial of Thomas Cole. And there are no clergymen present at the burial of the 3 blacks. Over the next few days, the Irish workers will refuse to go back to work. And with the exception of only a handful who return for their belongings or back wages, none of the blacks will ever again return to work on the tunnel. In the days that follow, the Irish will become much more brazen in their attempts to keep the locals from offering any assistance to identifying who participated in the riot and committed the murders. Mr. Conover, a farmer living near Pattenburg, later testifies that he overheard a group of the Irish proclaim, "If the citizens undertake to interfere with us, we'll beat their goddamn brains out and burn their houses for them." The intimidation appears to work on more than just the residents of Pattenburg. Sheriff Rittenhouse finds his local constables far from willing to arrest any of the suspected perpetrators, although summons after summons are eventually issued by the court in Flemington. Few of the sheriff's men will initially find the nerve to serve them, for they know that even if suspects do surrender to them within Pattenburg itself, it is another thing entirely to transport these prisoners across 12 miles of open farmland to Flemington while their comrades roam freely about the countryside. Sheriff Anderson, arriving from Clinton to assist Sheriff Rittenhouse, identifies 2 suspects he wishes to take prisoner. But applying for 3 local constables for aid in making the arrests and transporting the prisoners to Flemington, he too finds none willing to execute the warrants against the Irishmen. Not until the governor of New Jersey steps in, promising that arrests would either be made or he would send in federal troops, will any action and any arrest finally take place. Offering several thousands of dollars in rewards for information probably doesn't hurt. Eventually, Sheriff Rittenhouse's constables arrest 7 Irishmen suspected of participating in the riots and the killings. They also detain several of the black workers as witnesses. In reality, it is highly likely that with so many days as had gone between now and the time of the arrests, that any of the true ringleaders of the mob are still in the area. And in fact, one of the Irish workers is picked up in New York City days later. He tells the authorities that he was only bringing food and other supplies to his wife and was certainly, absolutely planning on returning to Pattenburg the first chance that he could. Many witnesses will later identify the Irishman Dennis Calloway as being the ringleader of the mob, indicating it was he they overheard and the torching of ordering the torching of Mercy Carter's house. But he is missing from the gang of workers when arrests are finally made, and no attempts are subsequently made to ascertain his whereabouts. The trials begin. Before we hear of one of these trials, I'd like to take a moment to explain just how the court systems worked back in 1872, particularly in a rural area where judicial resources were more limited. Suspects of crimes are seldom released on their own reconnaissance, especially if they do not live near the vicinity to which the crime has been committed. Risk of flight is considered too high, and there are often few constables available to go chasing them. Suspects, of course, could post bails, but these were usually of such an amount as to make it impossible for the average worker to come up with that money. Perhaps what is even more interesting is the practice of detaining witnesses, especially in cases of those who also lived outside of the area. At least this was the case with one witness, Charles Yates, a 22-year-old black cart driver and former slave in Virginia. He is detained and held on nothing more than suspicion of having knowledge of the fight, and he will remain in jail until the end of all of the trials. The first gentleman that is tried is David College, and despite all of the witnesses and testimony having identified him as one of the mob members, at the conclusion of his trial, with less than 20 minutes of the jury being out, they come back and declare him not guilty. For those of you who will like to buy and read the book, I won't go any further into all of the other trials. I think you'll find them interesting. Since the time of the riot and the murders, Pattenburg has remained pretty much the same as it looked back in 1872. Over the years, a few new houses have been added along Main Street. Even the old red schoolhouse is still there. And today, walking down Main Street on a misty late September evening, one can still almost see and hear the sounds of the mob that September night, hunting down their victims by torchlight. In the years that follow the massacre, residents will see a major amusement attraction, Bellwood Park, spring up just outside of the town in the direction of the tunnel. The park will bring thousands of visitors into town on weekends from places as far away as New York City and Philadelphia. And in fact, on opening day, President Theodore Roosevelt will be there for the commencements. But today, Bellwood Park is but a memory. A few concrete posts somewhere out in the woods as reminders and remnants of that amusement park. In time, a rock quarry company will later settle in on the site, and a massive crater now exists on the side of Jugtown Mountain. In the time, even that quarry will be abandoned. As for Asia Packard's tunnel, it will finally be completed a year after the massacre in 1873. Celebrities and notables from all around will attend the grand opening, but its life will be short-lived. Within just 50 years of its completion, it's no longer large enough to handle the two-way traffic coming and going east and west. And in 1928, the Lehigh Valley Railroad will build a newer, larger, dual-track tunnel just a few hundred yards to the south of it. One that still remains in service today, the trains bound east and west. The rails of the old tunnel have long been removed. It sits alone, now mostly forgotten, in the woods of west of Pattenburg, a silent witness to the men who worked and died building it. The railroad station that once served as a stopping point for transportation and passengers is also now gone. And visitors to Bellwood Park have long seen the end as it was torn down. Just a sign on a small 8x8 shed stands as a remnant of the time that those rails came through here. That and the stone ruins of an ice house once used to keep produce cold while it awaited shipment by rail car to the New York markets. People who witnessed the massacre will move on, and others will pass on. Mercy Carter herself will only live a few more years, dying from an undiagnosed illness, and the church she belonged to will be abandoned some years later by a congregation allegedly to have split over a dispute surrounding the disappearance of money raised from a church bazaar. The story of the riot and massacre will slowly cease to be told around the evening firesides of Hunterdon County. And over the years, when the story is recalled by some local reporter or writer, it will continue to grow less detailed, with fiction replacing fact, the sort of thing that makes urban legends. But make no mistake about it, it did happen, and it did happen here. The remains of Thomas Cole attest to that fact, even if the bodies of Dennis Powell, Ben Dishman, and Oscar Bruce, still lying in their unmarked graves somewhere along the abandoned rail line, cannot. Thank you.